My dad thought it was hilarious to make fun of women at a family dinner. He laughed. His friends laughed. And then I made one joke. Just one. Within seconds, the entire table was laughing at him instead. The funny part. He spent years blaming women's hormones for every argument in our house. But the moment someone pointed out that he was actually the moody one, suddenly the joke wasn't funny anymore. And what happened after dinner made the whole situation even more satisfying. Before we get into today's story, if you've ever had someone dish out jokes but completely lose their mind when the joke came back at them, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's jump into this incredibly satisfying story. This happened when I was 19 years old. Now, on paper my family looked pretty normal. There was my dad, my younger sister, my older sister, me. My older sister had already moved away for work. I was living away for college most of the year. Even my younger sister spent most of her time with friends, school activities, or locked away in her room. The house wasn't exactly overflowing with women causing chaos every day. But if you asked my dad, you'd think he was surviving some kind of never-ending emotional battlefield. For years he had this habit. Any disagreement, any tension, any bad mood, any argument, somehow it always came back to one explanation. Women. More specifically, women's hormones. If someone got annoyed at something he said, hormones. If one of us disagreed with him, hormones. If somebody got upset after being criticized, hormones. It became his favorite excuse. And honestly, got exhausting. Because it completely ignored the actual reason people were upset. It wasn't that women were emotional. It was usually because he had started something. But after years of hearing the same comments, most of us stopped arguing. It wasn't worth the energy, at least. Until this dinner. My dad had invited one of his longtime friends over. The friend brought his wife and teenage son. The atmosphere was relaxed. Food covered the table. Plates clinked. People chatted. Everyone seemed to be having a good time. Then the conversation shifted. Somehow the topic of kids came up. And that's when my dad leaned back in his chair with a grin. The kind of grin that usually meant he was about to say something he thought was clever. He looked at his friend and said, "You're lucky you got a son." The friend laughed. "What do you mean?" My dad waved his hand dramatically. "Living with women is impossible." Few people chuckled. Then he kept going. "Every month the whole atmosphere changes. More laughter. The moods. The arguments. The drama." He shook his head as if he were describing a natural disaster. His friend immediately jumped in. "I thank the Lord every day I don't have to deal with that." The two men laughed. My younger sister looked down at her plate. My older sister rolled her eyes. And I felt that familiar irritation rising in my chest. Not because it was the first time. Because it was probably the 1,000th. The thing about constant jokes is that eventually they stop feeling like jokes. They become opinions. And after years of hearing the same nonsense, I was tired. But here's the important part. I wasn't angry. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I simply decided to play by the same rules they were using. If they could joke about women, then surely I could joke about my dad, right? So I smiled, took a sip of my drink, and said, "Honestly, I think having a son exactly like you would be worse." The table went quiet. For about half a second. Then I continued. "You're moody and irritable all the time already. It's like you're permanently on your period." Silence. Laughter exploded around the table. His friend laughed first. A genuine laugh. The kind you can't fake. Then his friend's wife burst out laughing too. Even my sisters couldn't hold it in. For a moment my dad just sat there, blinking, processing. Because the joke had landed perfectly. And then something happened that made the moment even better. His friend's wife looked at her husband and pointed at him. "Oh, don't laugh." He grinned. "You're exactly like that too." Now everybody was laughing, even the friend. And suddenly the conversation shifted. Instead of women being the punchline, the men became the punchline, which was only fair. Because for years, they'd been making the exact same jokes in reverse. My dad's smile started fading. You could see it happening. His shoulders stiffened. His jaw tightened. Energy changed. But I wasn't finished. Because for once, I had an audience willing to listen. I shrugged and said, "Honestly, I don't even think the whole thing is true." The table got quieter. Not awkward quiet. Interested quiet. Continued. "I play sports during my period." My older sister nodded. I pointed toward her. "She's pretty relaxed most of the time." Then toward my younger sister. "And she's probably the calmest person in the house." Few people laughed. Then I said the part that hit hardest. "The funny thing is most of the arguments I remember at home started because of Dad." Silence. Not uncomfortable. Just accurate. Continued. He'd start an argument, somebody would react, and then suddenly he'd blame women's hormones. His friend's wife immediately nodded. The friend laughed nervously, because deep down, everybody knew exactly what I meant. The room had gone from joking to accidentally uncovering an uncomfortable truth. Dinner eventually ended. People left. Goodbyes were exchanged. Everything seemed normal, at least until the front door closed. The second the guests were gone, my dad's entire attitude changed. He looked furious, not shouting, not screaming, but that cold anger, the kind that's somehow worse. He pulled me aside, and immediately started in. "You embarrassed me." I stared at him. "What? You insulted me in front of my friend." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was coming from the same person who had just spent an entire dinner making jokes about women. But apparently one joke directed back at him was crossing the line. He continued. "It was disrespectful." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the hypocrisy was unbelievable. "You were literally making fun of women." His face hardened. "That's different." Course it was. It always is when people suddenly become the target. Then he said something that completely explained everything. He crossed his arms. "My friends and I take pride in being masculine." There it was. The real issue. Not the joke. Not disrespect. Not embarrassment. His ego. He wasn't upset because I had insulted him. He was upset because other people laughed. Especially other men. Especially his friend. And worst of all, his friend's wife had agreed with me. The joke hadn't just landed. It had exposed something. The entire image he was trying to project had cracked for a moment. And he hated that. As he lectured me, something suddenly became clear. For years, my dad had been comfortable making jokes at other people's expense. Women. His daughters. His wife. Anyone who fit the stereotype he liked to complain about. But the moment somebody held up a mirror, he couldn't handle it. Because deep down, he knew exactly why everyone laughed. The joke worked because it was true. Not completely true. Not literally. But true enough that everyone at that table instantly recognized it. And that's what bothered him most. Not the words. The accuracy. The more I thought about it afterward, the less guilty I felt. In fact, felt relieved. For years, his comments had gone unchallenged. People would awkwardly smile, change the subject, move on. Nobody ever pushed back. Nobody ever pointed out the obvious. Until that night. And the best part, I didn't scream. I didn't insult him. I didn't start a fight. I simply used his own style of humor. His own rules. His own logic. And suddenly he couldn't take it. That single moment did more to expose the double standard than any argument ever could. Sometimes people love joking around. Right up until they're the joke. And sometimes the most satisfying form of revenge isn't some elaborate master plan. Sometimes it's simply holding up a mirror and letting people see themselves exactly as everyone else sees them.